Hey y'all, welcome back. I'll Talk If You'll Listen, episode 65. I'm pretty excited because I've recently looked at the total downloads for the show and we've surpassed 5,000 downloads, which is huge, especially considering what the goal was when this show first started. The goal was to just have a show. And I think it's so dope to be at over 5,000 episodes because it means that everything else is just a bonus. You know, the goal was to have a show, publish it, and just to be like, hey, I have a podcast. If I have one listener, I'm grateful for it. And not too long ago, I went back and I listened to my very first episode. And then, of course, I remember listening to episode 64, which, not counting this one, is the latest episode. And just how much growth and development has happened to not only me as a host, but just the show. It went through several changes, and it's kind of surreal to think like, wow, I'm at over 5,000, especially when your goal wasn't even, it's kind of like your goal is to be able to share your homemade cookies with the neighborhood, and next thing you know, you're like an international business selling these cookies. It's like, wow, you know, you're proud of it, you're extremely humbled, but by no means was that the goal, initially anyway. So you all know how I feel about this show. I would love to do this full time. I would love to get paid doing this show, and I would love to have this be the main source of income for me personally. But, you know, that's not realistic right now. But at one point, I didn't think 5,000 episodes was realistic. So, or rather 5,000 downloads, I should say, was realistic. And here we are. So thank you so much to everybody who helped us get here. And this show is, in a way, belongs to you just like it belongs to me. In the sense that we got to do this together. I put a lot of emphasis on we. We got over 5,000 downloads. And I think that's huge. That's just simply huge. Many of you know I am a Mason, Freemason. And I'm actually the presiding officer of my lodge for this year, which is essentially like the president, the acting presiding officer of the lodge. And with that comes a lot of work, especially for me, the fourth and the first weeks of the month. And I put them that way because when they're back to back, it seems like a month's long project, but it's really 2 weeks, but it feels like so much longer. I would have made a much bigger deal about 5,000 because I was keeping an eye on it. Like, I was looking at it, but like, I kind of stopped. I remember seeing it at like 4,800 and it was like 4,950, somewhere around there. And I'm like, okay. And then I kind of just stopped because I'm so preoccupied with so many other things. And then you go and check and it's like 5,001 downloads. It's like, oh, that's awesome. So I would have made much more of a bigger deal if I had the time, but I knew I didn't have enough time to plan anything or go nuts. So I'll be on social media probably after this week because this week is going to kill me, y'all. Just to thank everybody, just to recap some of my favorite moments. And yeah, I'm just thinking back on so many different topics that we've covered. We covered the Black church. We covered interracial dating. We covered open relationships. We covered mental health. We covered so much. Female gamers. Oh, so many different topics across the board we've covered, and it's just been huge. And I can't wait to continue this journey. I'm just thinking about so many more topics that we can talk about moving forward. It's just going to be crazy. I'm going to be honest, though, everybody. This week kicked my butt. Today kicked my butt. And I'm not really feeling too much energy. So what I wanted to do before we roll into our interview, I do have an interview. And it's the first time that I can remember having an active podcaster on the show. I know I've had my buddy Maurice on the show, and this was both before and after he started his My Brother show. And I know I had my buddy Kyle on the show before to talk about mental health. I want to say it was like episode 21. Where he had a podcast, but I didn't think he was active. Like, I don't think he was actively podcasting at the time. that I had him on the show. But tonight's guest, the guest for this episode, is an active podcaster. So I'm really excited about that as we take the show in a new direction. Because as you all know, I'm all about education, and I don't think that should just be limited to like race, culture, music, art. I think it should also be in the realm of, military or civilian lives for people who used to be in the military or they're dating someone in the military. So I'm really excited to talk about that a little bit later on. But before I do, I did want to close out this month strong and keep the topic and the theme going. And I wanted to close on Black History Month. So I actually did a little bit of studying on Black History Month in and of itself. And I found out some pretty cool things that I didn't even know until I went to go research this. So I'm really excited to read this. So I'm going to go ahead and start. And I'm on history.com. And this was after a quick search for Black History Month. So I'm going to go ahead and read this in its entirety. And I can't wait to discuss this in person with many of you who hit me up on a regular basis. Black History Month. Actually, before I get started, I'm going to say this. I think it's so important to do research more as an adult than it is as a kid. Because as a kid, when you have adults teaching you about things, you're kind of taught that you're supposed to know this. Like, you need to know about Black History Month. I gave this example a long time ago when it comes to like insurance and co-pays and things of that nature, how you're kind of just expected as an adult to know this stuff. If you are, 15, 16, 17 years old, asking about co-pays and insurance and all these different things, in network, out of network, types of coverage, you're told that, oh, you're too young. Don't worry about that. You'll learn about it when you get older. And then no one teaches you, and then you get older, and the next thing you know, someone's telling you, oh, they're kind of like looking down their nose at you in a very condescending tone that you don't know about insurance. I remember the first time I was on my own insurance and I called a doctor's office. First time me going to a doctor's appointment, not on my mother's insurance and not with my mom, like I was going on my own. And the young lady picked up the phone. I told her I was looking to schedule a doctor's appointment. And she was asking me a few questions about insurance. I said, I don't know. Like, I think she asked who my primary care physician was. Or does my insurance require a primary care physician? And I remember not having these answers to the different questions she was asking me. And I could hear it in her tone of voice. She was like shocked that I didn't know. So I think sometimes it's even more important to learn things as an adult than it is as a kid, because as a kid, you're probably going to get taught, even if you don't know why, you're probably going to get taught about Black History Month. But as an adult, it's kind of just presumed that you know already. So if someone's going to make that presumption, you may as well go to a place that's not going to judge you, and that's the internet. As far as the internet is concerned, you're doing a Google search or a Bing search, whatever your preferred search engine is, and you're just educating yourself about it. So I am not too proud or too embarrassed to admit that there are certain things that I just don't know. But the really weird thing about ignorance is it can be exciting because it's an opportunity to learn. One of my favorite quotes is, a man who knows everything knows nothing at all. And different variations of that quote, but really, really excited about just the journey this month has been for me in learning, and I can't wait to continue my education outside of this month. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and read this article. Black History Month honors the contributions of African Americans to U.S. history. Among prominent figures are Madam C.J. Walker, who was the first U.S. woman to become a self-made millionaire, George Washington Carver, who derived nearly 300 products from the peanut, Rosa Parks, who sparked the Montgomery bus boycott and galvanized the civil rights movement, and Shirley, oh man, I'm going to butcher this name. It's spelled Chisholm. Not too embarrassed to admit that I have no idea who that is. I'm going to say Chisholm, Shirley Chisholm, who was the first African American woman elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Oh, that's cool. Okay, and here's some more Black History Month facts, beginning with Black History Month. Black History Month. The celebration of Black History Month began as Negro History Week, which was created in 1926 by Carter G. Woodson, a noted African American historian, scholar, educator, and publisher. It became a month-long celebration in 1976. The month of February was chosen to coincide with the birthdays of Frederick Douglass and Abraham Lincoln. NAACP. On February 12, 2019, the NAACP marked its 110th anniversary. Spurred by growing racial violence in the early 20th century, and particularly by 1908, race riots in Springfield, Illinois, a group of African American leaders joined together to form a new permanent civil rights organization, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or NAACP. February 12, 1909, was chosen because it was the centennial anniversary of the birth of Abraham Lincoln. Heavyweight champ Jack Johnson became the first African American man to hold the World Heavyweight Champion boxing title in 1908. Oh, go figure. He held onto the belt until 1915. Wow. That's huge. That's almost 10 years. First lawyer, John Mercer Langston, was the first black man to become a lawyer when he passed the bar in Ohio in 1854. When he was elected to the post of town clerk for Brownhelm, Ohio in 1855, Langston became one of the first African Americans ever elected to public office in America. John Mercer Langston was also the great uncle of Langston Hughes, famed poet of the Harlem Renaissance. That's cool. See, we're learning together. I didn't read this article before I started the show, so this is cool. Famous protesters and activists. While Rosa Parks is credited with helping to spark the civil rights movement when she refused to give up her public bus seat to a white man in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955, inspiring the Montgomery bus boycott, the lesser-known Claudette Colvin was arrested 9 months prior to not giving up her bus seat to a white passenger. Go figure. Supreme Court Justice. I knew this one. Thurgood Marshall was the first African American ever appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. He was appointed by President Lyndon B. Johnson and served on the court from 1967 to 1991. Eminent scientist George Washington Carver developed 300 derivative products from peanuts, among them cheese, milk, coffee, flour, ink, dyes, plastics, wood stains, soap, linoleum, medicinal oils, and cosmetics. Go ahead, Mr. Carver. First Senator Hiram Rhodes Revels was the first African American ever elected to the U.S. Senate. He represented the state of Mississippi from February 1870 to March 1871. First woman representative, Shirley Chisholm, was the first African American woman elected to the House of Representatives. She was elected in 1968 and represented the state of New York. Go figure. Okay. She broke ground again 4 years later in 1972 when she was the first major party African American candidate and the first female candidate for president of the United States. Self-made millionaire. Madam C.J. Walker was born on a cotton plantation in Louisiana and became wealthy after inventing a line of African American hair care products. She established Madam C.J. Walker Laboratories and was also known for her philanthropy. Oscar winner, 1940, Hattie McDaniel, was the first African American performer to win an Academy Award, the film industry's highest honor, for her portrayal of a loyal slave governess in Gone with the Wind. First professional black baseball player. On April 5th, 1947, my man Jackie Robinson became the first African American to play Major League Baseball when he joined the Brooklyn Dodgers. He led the league in stolen bases that season and was named Rookie of the Year. It could have been any other stat. Why had to be stolen bases, Jackie? Come on now. First black billionaire. Before Oprah Winfrey and Michael Jordan joined the Billionaires Club, Robert Johnson became the first African American billionaire when he sold the cable station he founded, Black Entertainment Television, BET, in 2001. Oh, wow. I didn't know that. First black president. We all know this one. In 2008, Barack Obama became the first black president of the United States of America. And rounding out the last two here, first black vice president. In 2021, Kamala Harris became the first woman of African or Asian descent to become vice president. Harris's mother immigrated to the United States from India, and her father immigrated from Jamaica. Yes, brother. Wagwan. Population growth. The black population of the United States in 1870 was 4.8 million. In 2018, the number of black residents of the United States is 43.8 million. Look at that. That's awesome. That's really, really awesome. And to stay in line, this was updated in 2021 of February 1st to keep in line with Black History. I think that's so cool. I just learned a little bit more, not only about Black history, but about some of those prominent Black figures in history. And I'm proud to be Black. I really, really am. And the more I learn about my heritage and about my culture, the more I feel connected to who I am, as weird as that sounds. I feel like I'm rediscovering myself. And it's helping me to understand why certain people are always so angry. It helps me to sympathize with them a little bit. But it also helps me to feel inspired when you hear about so many accomplishments, prominent ones at that, within the Black community, specifically Black culture. And sometimes it's really easy to take a look, and I mentioned this a couple of episodes ago. It's really easy to look at the Madam C.J. Walkers, the George Washington Carvers, the Malcolm X's, the Rosa Parks, the Maya Angelou's, and be really proud, right? But these are people in history that you kind of learn about in school. Sometimes it's really easy to take for granted some of the people right now who are making history and are Black. So I think that's huge, particularly for certain subgroups of people. I think it's really, really huge. So I hope you took the opportunity to at least one day, 1 second, 1 hour, 1 week of this month to look up somebody and be educated. I see a lot of companies getting behind Black-owned businesses and making donations to, Black foundations. My only thought is, although I am glad that that's happening, I'll take an inch. You don't need to really give me a mile. I would really like to see a whole lot more of that throughout the remainder of the year, and maybe not have it just an annual thing that occurs during Black History, or at least not really publicize it, because then it kind of seems like a publicity stunt. I would really like for a company to make it a part of their normal charitable donations, or charitable acts, charitable events. And that way, when February comes around and somebody says, oh, so-and-so is donating to this Black-owned business or this Black foundation or this Black charity, I want people to go, well, yeah, I know they do that all the time. That would be very, very much appreciated, and I think it would be a step in the right direction. So that's all I have. Really, I just really wanted to kind of shine a light on Black History Month and go out with a bang, especially the last episode of the month. Now, depending on when this comes out, it technically might be March, but I'm hoping that the spirit of Black history is still at the core of the episode. That said, I am going to take a brief break, and I'm going to come back on the other side with the introduction of our guest. Hey, gang, thanks for waiting. So, one thing I think a lot of people get overlooked and is the impact that culture has on the U.S. military and the military's impact on U.S. culture when it comes to certain things. And oftentimes, you kind of got to go out of your way to find useful and helpful information when it comes to military life. And I wanted to do this especially for my minority listeners, my black listeners, Asian listeners, Latino listeners, whatever the case may be, who may feel like they don't have enough of the resources needed in order to be a productive military spouse, to be a productive uh, active duty a service member, a reservist, whatever the case may be. If you're enlisted in the U.S. military, you may feel limited on what resources are out there to help you better understand your finances, your benefits, things of that nature. So I reached out to this next guest to have her on to educate. Now, I'm all about education, especially this month when it comes to educating people who look and sound like me about people who look and sound like me. I thought it a wonderful opportunity to have this next guest on to talk about a little bit of education when it comes to the military life. So this was a fun conversation. It was a very organic conversation, wasn't scripted at all, and it was really nice. I learned a lot about my next guest, and I'm hoping that you all go and check her out. So without further ado, here is our next guest, Jen Amos, Gold Star daughter, veteran spouse, and host of Holding Down the Fort podcast. Check it out.
Hey gang, welcome back. Another episode, another week, and this time, not just another guest, a very special guest. We have a Gold Star daughter, host of Holding Down the Fort podcast, which is an award-winning podcast, Jen Amos. Jen, how are you?
Tim, it's great to be here. I'm doing all right. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited for our conversation today.
I cannot tell you. I think my face is going to hurt after I get off the call because I've been smiling so much. I've been looking forward to the interview. And Jen, I guess we can tell everybody, we've been kind of planning this for weeks now. I want to say, about 2-3 weeks?
Yeah, and I just want to thank you, Tim, for your patience. My year has started off really jam-packed with a ton of things, and I can't be any more grateful considering just the landscape of life today. And It's just nice to feel that despite everything, I'm productive and I still have the means to serve in the capacity that I can. So, I just want to thank you for your patience in getting this coordinated, because I know that it probably would have been more ideal to maybe do it the week of that you messaged me. But I, again, appreciate your patience to get this together.
Oh, no, not at all. Actually, you did me a huge favor because it really helped out with the preparation. And it gave us a little bit of wiggle room and, hey, attitude, preparation, and effort. Those are the things I can control. So I had no problem being patient. And honestly, it was really, really, it's kind of like riding a roller coaster. Like, hey, now I'm at the top and, I can't wait to kind of go on the rest of the ride. So, although we met on a podcasting network and we don't really know each other that well, I feel like after listening to your podcast and getting to know a little bit of what you do, I feel closer, especially as a podcaster. There's a lot I think we have in common. But before we talk about that, I would really like a lot of my viewers, especially those who may be active duty military, inactive reserve, anyone who may be a veteran at the moment. I would like them to get to know you as a person. So I got a few questions for you, and I was hoping we can just explore those areas if that sounds like a plan.
Yeah, let's do it.
Sure. So it looks like I did a little research, a little digging, and it looks like you went to San Diego State University. What can you tell our viewers? Because you hear all these things about San Diego, how it's beautiful, it's great, it's sunny. I've never heard a bad thing about San Diego. Can you tell us anything about that area that maybe the average tourist wouldn't know?
Yeah, it's funny because I now live in Virginia Beach, and I remember just leading up to the move, my friends would ask me, or actually my new friends out here when we came out here and I told them where I was from, they were like, why'd you leave Paradise? You know, like they just jokingly say that. And there's a lot of good things to say about San Diego. For one, the weather is perfect. I will say that. I mean, it really does depend on where you live, but for the most part, being new to the East Coast for the last 3 years now,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize how I took for granted just my style of clothing back in San Diego. Like I didn't have to think too much about bringing a jacket with me when I left the house. I didn't have to think about like staying warm, where I remember first moving out here when it first hit like 16 degrees. And luckily my sister lives in New York City, so she told me before my first winter came, she was like, make sure you get a down coat. Make sure you get like, use this brand, get like thermal jeans, get thermal everything. And I'm so glad I did, because just the type of material like wool and cotton just would not do it. It wouldn't make the cut for just how intense the weather is out here. And I have never looked at the Weather Channel app so many times in my life until I moved out here. But in San Diego, I didn't have to do that. And and the thing is also, it's like when it started to drizzle, you thought, oh, that's not a big deal. Here, when it drizzles, like it rains and then it pours. And so I've learned to just be more aware of that. But San Diego's great. The downside of it, I would say though, is now that I'm out here, I can say this just because I'm out here now, but you know, California in general, because the weather is pretty good over there, it is a little vain. It is about fashion. It's about like how you look. Everyone cares about like, can you suck it in? You know what I mean? Like everyone cares about their physique, their how they appear on the surface, where out here, like I haven't had to worry about that. Like I haven't felt self-conscious about gaining a couple pounds or just wearing loose clothing all the time. And so it is a little vain out there. And then the third thing, which I think is very important to talk about, is just the homelessness issue.
Yes.
All the major parks there, you know, are just crowded, you know, with homeless people who a lot of them are actually veterans, unfortunately, you know, and since COVID has happened, there's been more and more homeless people, a lot of them by choice, you know, because it turns out I would say this myself, if there's any place I would be homeless, it would be California, because weather's perfect. A lot of people are giving. A lot of people will just, you know, go out and give you food left and right. So It's not a bad deal, you know, and you have the public parks. If you have a tent, like you're solid, like you can do just fine. And so that's definitely, you know, kind of the reality of perfect weather is like you attract, I guess, more homelessness, because I remember when we moved out here, I was like, where's all the homeless people? Like, I was just so used to that. We're out here, I was like, oh, maybe there's one, maybe there's two, but you know, if it's too cold, like who's gonna be out? And of course they very much exist out here, but definitely not as prominent as San Diego and California as a whole. And then the last thing I will mention, Tim, I know I'm like being very extensive about this, is one thing that, I didn't have in San Diego that I have out here is just that hospitality. Like people here actually give me eye contact and actually say hello and wave at me and have a conversation with me, where back in San Diego, like people wouldn't even look at you, because we were sort of conditioned, at least with my mom, of like, don't talk to strangers, you know, like don't don't talk to strangers. Right. And so it just is a different culture overall. But yeah, I would say that for people that are just visiting, it's perfect. San Diego's perfect. It's beautiful. But if you live there, you start to see the cost of perfection. You really do. So
I'm sure. And I've come across a lot of people who are in the military, whether they be friends, some distant family members, or even customers when I used to work in retail. And you would hear so many different types of stories from different parts of the world. And I call myself a tourist in my own city. I don't really get to travel too much. So I always like to hear other people's experiences. And that was one of the driving forces behind me wanting to going to the military back in the day, of wanting to travel and see the world, because I was such a person that was kind of cooped up in his own city. And you talked about a few different areas in regards to San Diego. You talked about the culture, you talked about the climate, but you also talked about, the vanity and gaining weight. And I don't know about you, Jen, I've gained a little bit of weight, since quarantine has started. And one thing I'm curious about when it comes to people, when it comes to different places, is the food. And I have a really fun question for you. The people in Philadelphia roll their eyes whenever they see the stereotypical shots of the Liberty Bell and the stereotypical shots of the big name cheesesteak places and the stereotypical shots of the pretzels and all this other stuff. And sometimes we feel like, hey, we're much more than that. You're showing the stuff that touristy stuff. I want you to show the real stuff. Is there anything that comes to mind for you when it comes to San Diego that maybe people would see on TV and it's really not the real San Diego, that as a person from San Diego, you kind of roll your eyes at?
Wow, that's a good question, because it's hard for me to, I haven't run into enough, I guess, people around here where they would say, oh yeah, I visited San Diego, this and this and this. It's hard I'm trying to imagine what people would say. I mean, I think the assumption of San Diego is that it's a beach town and that it's very like slow paced and everything. It's just like a retirement community overall. But, I sort of do believe I sort of agree with the slow pace aspect if you compare it to LA, because a lot of people end up leaving LA to retire in San Diego, or they have a second home in San Diego, or what have you. But, we're not just a retirement home. There's very much, suburbia is a thing in San Diego too. I grew up, a little more southern San Diego. I grew up in most of the school system there, at least when we ended up moving there, very much close to the Mexican border. And yeah, it's just regular families just trying to do right by their kids and, taking them through the school system to go to college, to get a good job, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, there's a boring side of San Diego that's, not boring side, but yeah, there's a suburban side, I think is what I'm trying to say. It's not just a beach town. And then there's just a lot of different subcultures in San Diego. I feel like you can, if you don't like one culture, if you want more of the city life, you have downtown San Diego. If you don't like the whole going to the clubs and being perfect all the time, there's places like North Park, South Park, Hillcrest, where it's more down to earth, or people call it hipster, hipster town, where it's a little more casual, laid back, wearing sneakers at a bar kind of thing, as opposed to nice shoes and heels or whatever. But yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there's a lot of different perceptions of San Diego, but I do think that what people need to understand is that it's actually really eclectic. I think that's what people maybe don't know, that maybe they come there once, they look at the beaches and they think it's perfect and beautiful and very, like you said, touristy, but it is very eclectic, and you can find a lot of subcultures in San Diego, and it's huge. It's a huge city. It's not just, you don't think San Diego and think of it as like an island of sorts with one culture. No, there's so many more little towns and cities in San Diego with different, like I said, different subcultures. So I think that's the key word, is it's a lot more eclectic than, let's say, the average tourist would think.
Wow, that was very insightful. I think that'll be really helpful for a lot of people who want to come, because there's so many. I remember going to San Antonio one time, and it was for work, so I couldn't really call it a vacation, but I remember going to San Antonio, and there was somebody he was a vendor rep, so he would travel all over the country, and he would say so many stereotypical things about Philly, because it's just, whenever he's watching sports, they show the stereotypical shot of the skyline, or they talk about the Schuylkill River and all these different things. And I'm like, oh man, there's so much more to the city. So I'm sure people from San Diego and the surrounding areas will appreciate that. There's one key thing that I think that you just said that can also apply to our topic today, and that's perception is reality. And I think a lot of people have this perception of military life. They have this perception of being a spouse to someone who has been in the military. And they even have a perception of what life is like after the military, for so many different reasons. Some of them positive, some of them not so much. You once shared on one of your episodes, when you were a guest on another person's podcast, that you kind of had a general perception about military life, and your current marriage and meeting your husband kind of helped to change that. And can we talk about that a little bit, on what that switch was for you, and based on your history, I would like to talk a little bit about that too. How your view went from one way and then something happened and now it is the way it is today.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So I grew up, so first and foremost, both my parents were immigrants from the Philippines. My dad was the one that joined the U.S. Navy before, I believe, the military bases were shut down in the Philippines when America took over and the Spaniards were, actually no, I'm sorry, when the Philippines became an independent state from America, I believe that's when the American bases shut down. So my dad was, the last batch of people to join the military, the U.S. Navy. And I was born in Japan, in Yokosuka, Japan Naval Base. And it's actually kind of interesting because first and foremost, being of Filipino descent, being born in Japan, but on American soil, you can tell already that I was going to have a cultural, this culture shock and trying to juggle with different cultures and identities at a very young age. And then on top of that, we moved around every 2 to 3 years. The interesting thing is, the first base that I at least was a part of, the one that I was born at, turned out to be my dad's last military base, the last place he was stationed at before he was 2 years away from retiring. So he had already served 18 years at this point, and he was going to finish his service there in Japan. Well, unfortunately, this was back in 1998. My dad's last ship, which is the USS Kitty Hawk, was going from Japan to South Korea when he went missing. And they actually sent a search crew for 3 days, and they continued the investigation for 3 months after that until they just kind of let it go, and they were able to not find any more evidence. But by the time they gave up on that, my family and I had already catapulted our lives back to being civilians. We went back to San Diego because my mom has family there, and also my dad's brother was there, so it just made sense to go back there. And it was interesting. Once we returned back to civilian life, and I was 10 at the time, it was as if we completely forgot about dad. It was as if it's like he didn't exist anymore because mom was just so focused on raising these 3 kids under 11 years old. So, fast forward to, 20 plus years later, when I met my husband, who is a West Point grad, and his class graduated when 9/11 happened. So he was one of the first of many soldiers to go to Iraq. And when he came back, he transitioned out. But even though he transitioned back into civilian life, he got into financial services and specialized in the military community. And so it was interesting meeting him. He ended up leaving Germany to come to San Diego, and that's actually how we met. He was in town, and he was at the time I had a social media marketing agency, and he was looking for a social media manager, and so we were introduced to each other. And I promise I don't do this to all of my clients, but yeah, we ended up hitting it off, and here we are today, 5 years later, being together and in business. But the interesting thing is when I met him, I had actually assumed that people only join the military for employment opportunities. I thought, oh, you're looking for a better life. You're looking, for a chance to travel to get out of your certain situation, and then of course, after losing my dad, I saw it as a death trap. I saw any job in general that kind of promised long-term stability, benefits, etc. I saw that as a death trap because I thought, like, if I'm in anything stable, I'm going to die like my dad, it was just this thing that stuck in me mentally. But when I met my husband, who very much is service driven, and mission oriented, he actually showed me a different side of the military, which was to serve. I mean, at West Point, they taught him duty, honor, country, so even after his service, and a lot of his classmates, even after they transition out of the military, still serving, working C-suite positions, business owners, just doing a lot of incredible things, running for politics. Like, he has all those types of friends. And I was all like, I don't have types of friends like that. But what it did is it kind of sparked that, I guess, desire to do something greater than myself. And part of that part of wanting to do that first and foremost was to work past or unpack really the trauma that I had experienced in losing my dad. So, there's just a lot of things, in the 20 years after losing my dad that I really had to work through. But I guess you can say in regards to the transformation, I personally went from like, no, the military is bad. It takes away the people you love, to, oh, the military has taught me to be, service oriented, mission oriented, and to, focus on things that are greater than me. Because what else are we going to do on this earth? Like, we're all about serving each other, and it just gives me more purpose in life, and makes me feel more fulfilled and, just satisfied with what I'm doing today. Like, I'm not just running a business to make money. I'm running a business to serve, so there's a lot in there, but I hope that made sense.
No, sure. I think that's huge. So first and foremost, thank you for sharing that. I'm sure, being a podcaster and sometimes a guest, it's a story you go through many times, but I think that's huge for you to be able to draw from those emotions that you experienced 20 years ago and do a lot of self-reflection. And that's phenomenal. I think for people to hear that, like, hey, you can think one way about something and have something in your life completely shake the foundation of that belief system. And sometimes it's for the better. I think that's awesome. Another thing that I think is shaking up the foundation for a lot of different things is your podcast. It is an award-winning podcast, and it is military-centric. But more specifically, what I like about it, it gives people the necessary knowledge and tools in order to succeed. So specifically when it comes to current and post-military life. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to create the Holding Down the Fort podcast and what it was like to get these guests onto your show to talk about these different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. So this actually started, the idea came about amongst my colleagues in the business I run with my husband, U.S. Vet Wealth, and we focus primarily on, the way that I like to describe it is we provide thought-provoking financial education and flexible financial solutions for our career military families. And the thing is, when it comes to financial decisions in a household, you can talk to the service member all day, but at the end of the day, it's the spouse that holds down the fort and says, yeah, we can go with that, or no, like, I don't like that financial decision. And so, my team mainly consisted of veterans. And so naturally they would attract other veterans and talk about their finances. But very often we would come across, like, let's say that a veteran is ready to move forward and then finally includes their spouse into the conversation. They're like, wait, what? Like, you didn't tell me. You didn't
right.
tell me. I don't want to do this. And so it's usually at that end when there's this miscommunication. And of course the spouse, who probably already just feels like their life is a constant treasure hunt and it's constantly changing and shifting, to hear that their service member made a decision without them, it's kind of insulting, And so,
right.
So with my background, having been a military family, like a career military family, I felt like it was best for me to build that relationship with these families. And also because I think to many civilians, when you think about soldiers, you don't really think of them as human. You just think like, oh, they're here to serve, they're here to protect. Mm-hmm. But you don't think about the family that they come home to. You don't think about, like, if you lose a soldier, you don't just lose a soldier. You lose like the family spirit, their drive,
mm-hmm.
Like the effects of losing a soldier is like, it's not just a soldier that's lost for the nation, but for a family and the ripple effects that can cause, which I can, talk about at a very intimate level, because, when we lost dad, it's like our life just catapulted back to civilian life. We didn't have a lot of support. My mom just focused on, fortunately we had family that she could depend on, but it took me, like Tim, 20 plus years to, have a podcast like this where I'm finally learning what resources are even available for me as a Gold Star daughter that I didn't know a long time ago because I just wasn't informed. And so in addition to building a relationship with the career military families of today, for the sake of our business, but really for just to understand who they are and what their needs are, not us assuming like, hey, you need financial planning. what we come to find is that it's hard for them to make these decisions because they're distracted with a million other things, so we have to be sensitive to that and not just, talk about money like right away. And then also, with the podcast, that because they have so many distractions or they have so many things to balance, we realize like, well, we need to put together a show where we do bring on movers and shakers of the community and for the community to let them know that they exist and they're here to help. Because the government can only do so much. Like, everyone has their thoughts on the government, but for the most part, they can't do it all. No one can do it all, even the government. And
right.
And that's not a political statement. That's just fact in life. No one can do everything. And
sure.
so the whole idea is that to have a show where, sometimes it's easier to open up to someone who's been through a similar experience as you than to open up to a therapist. And that's really the approach that I take on the show is like, I want to bring people who are in the community or for the community that do have knowledge, resources, or, relevant stories that these career military families can, eat up. And more importantly, feel like, oh, okay, no matter where I go, no matter where I move to next, holding down the fort it feels like home to me. It feels like a place that I can go to consistently and know that like whoever's on the show, I can contact them right now if I wanted to because they want to be contacted. They want people to reach out to them, and a lot of times military spouses, how they collect their resources and tools and what have you is through word of mouth. And so they chat with one another and they say, hey, what do you recommend? What do you recommend? And so this show very much serves as that extra, word of mouth platform in case they move to a new place and they don't know who to talk to, but at least they know that they have this community of people who've been on my show that they can reach out and, connect with. So that's a little bit about that. And in regards to how we find people, initially it started with me personally, like going on Instagram and using hashtags military spouse, MILSO, MILSPO, and finding all of these military spouses who are very, let's say like narrative and expressive about their story and their journey and their struggle. And I asked them to be on the show. And then here we are in the 4th season. We don't have to really do much outreach anymore because people find us and they apply to be on our show. So, and on top of that, I even met my co-host. And she's always like, hey, what about this person? What about that person? And so initially it was hard it wasn't hard, but I had to put in a lot of effort to do the outreach. And now it's just so great to have a pending list of people who are waiting to hear back from me and be chosen. Someone mentioned to me, a past guest said, thank you for choosing me to be on your show. And it's just nice to make them feel honored, I guess, to be on the show. But that's really what it's become today is sort of this like waiting list of people that we need to, qualify to bring on. And of course, like share whatever they want to share to continue to help our families today.
Wow. That's beautiful, Jen. There's so much there to unpack that really speaks to me, not only as a podcaster, but as a person. And I'm going to touch on the personal piece first. One of the things that I love is music. I love music. I love the way music makes me feel. I love the way the music makes me think. And I love how vulnerable I feel when I listen to certain songs and how happy or how angry I feel when I listen to certain songs. And I think your podcast is synonymous to music in the sense that people can hear it and they can have these emotions kind of validated in a way when they listen to your podcast. So I think it's really cool to have a podcast called Holding Down the Fort because essentially you want to relate to that. Take occupation out of it, take, where you're at currently in your life out of it, and you just want to be validated on how you're feeling. And I think when you listen to Holding Down the Fort, you feel that way. And I think that's dope that you are taking so many different things from, home ownership or travel or so many different things, and people who've been in those boots, literally, not figuratively, been in those boots or been in those core frames, and you're having them on the show, and somebody on the other side of that speaker is listening and relating and learning. You can't produce that. That's a genuine feeling, and I think that's super dope. Now, as a podcaster, I really like the name because as simple as it is, you and I both know that coming up with a name for something is the hardest thing in the world. It is super hard. You have like social groups. You ask 50 people. You have 50 different names, and in my case, you may even record a few episodes with the older name, and you're like, you know what, I don't like how that sounds, and you go over it over and over and over again. And I think holding down the fort, I don't know how long it took you to get there, but it's so important because you hold down the fort by having a fort, a virtual fort of people coming to you to gain knowledge and stability and to create a foundation. You also hold down the fort in the sense that you want to keep this idea going and you want to touch so many people and you impact so many people's lives. I think that's awesome. I think it's amazing. And I think the name is very, very appropriate. Now, certain forts are stationary. I think your fort is very, versatile. It's very mobile. And that can be a theme when it comes to military life and being a military spouse or being a veteran spouse is you're very mobile. You're all over the place. You're traveling nonstop. You get the next PCS and you're like, oh man, I gotta go here. I was just getting used to this school district, or I was just getting used to this hoagie shop or this sandwich shop, and now I gotta move, you know. Those are things that can really blindside people. But more in particular, I think it can impact minorities in a way that doesn't necessarily impact other social groups or other categories or demographics, because at times we already feel out of place. Can you recall any stories or any experiences that either you yourself personally have had, or maybe anybody that you come into contact with who may have some struggles in adapting to their surroundings because of they're in a place that they would never be before, and how much of a struggle that could be, in particular as a minority?
Yeah, wow. I have so many thoughts, but I think the first thing is thank you for complimenting my title to my show, Holding Down the Fort. I do want to say that I didn't come up with the name. One of my colleagues did. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, a little background in case anyone's curious. So I was talking amongst my colleagues, and I remember we were on this phone call, it was a conference call, and I was like, you know, like it has to be a title about like how military spouses are just like killing it, you know, like how they just balance all these things and create a stable home for the service member to come back to. And so shout out to one of my colleagues, Ethan. He said, holding down the fort. And
just like that.
Yeah. And he's a genius. If you met him, he's a crazy genius, like crazy genius AF. I'm not gonna cuss, but if anyone knows what AF means, like, yeah, he's crazy in the best way possible. And as soon as we knew that, as soon as he said that, we actually were like, okay, we got to run with it. Like, that's a pretty awesome title. We got our designer our graphic designer to put together and everything. So I'm just so glad that I hear you, like when it comes to coming up with names, like one of my other podcast shows, it took me forever to come up with that name, but I think it helps, they say like two heads are better than one, right? And so I'm so glad that I had my colleagues to talk about that. It's like I knew that the need was there, but I didn't know how to name it, and he totally did that. So that's like shout out to Ethan for, that name. So
hey, good job, Ethan.
yeah, good job, Ethan. Shout out to you. So it's interesting, Tim, because on my podcast show, I tend to find, although I have a pretty good amount of people I've interviewed on there, I tend to find that, and I say this in this is just an observation, like this is nothing racial or anything, but I tend to find that a lot of white women like to come on the show and share their, resources, their story, what have you. And it's every now and then I'll get like one or two that, is either Asian or African or Black that wants to be on the show, and or just like, a colored person such as myself. And so it's always kind of, it's funny because when I do have someone like that, although I do pretty fine like navigating the white space, like my husband is white, and I currently live in a white town. The thing is the thing with being Filipino American, which I think what's unique about being Filipino American is that in the Philippines, so little history lesson for everyone, the Philippines was colonized by Spaniards for about like 600 years. And then America came in and, took that away, and they kind of were the next batch of people to colonize, the Philippines. And even till this day, Tim, it's actually quite astounding. In the Philippines, English is a second language they teach in the school system, and they teach the alphabet. I actually learned this recently. I'm always like learning more about these things, like through one of my podcast shows with some incredible women on there. But for their alphabet, they teach like American terms. Like, for example, like A is for apple, but apples don't grow in the Philippines, you know?
Wow.
And so they really instill that American culture over there. So when you come here to America, when people immigrate here, it's almost like they immediately know how to blend in. But at the same time, it does come at a cost, because even though you are very Americanized, like you're not white. You know what I mean? Like, you look at me, I kind of describe myself as like a coconut. Like, I'm brown on the outside, but very Americanized on the inside. And in regards to the military community, it's interesting because a lot of enlisted service members are minorities, are minorities, immigrants, people like, just like my own family, wanting to leave their country for better, more, I wouldn't say better, but I'm going to say more opportunities, because, the Philippines is still amazing, in its own right, and so, it's interesting because I think that the common theme also amongst minorities in general, or colored people, however, I know everyone terms it differently, but yeah, colored people, minorities, what have you, we don't value mental health, right? Like, on average, like the average like colored person doesn't value it, or kind of has a negative view on it, or just thinks like you're crazy if you try to like get therapists and stuff like that. And I think part of that is because a lot of us are generally just action-oriented, solution-oriented. Like, it's just about like, fulfilling our basic needs of being fed, having a roof over our head, feeling secure and stuff like that. But in regards to talking about our feelings, that's a whole other story that people such as myself who was raised American struggle with, because, part of my struggle that I dealt with after we transitioned out is that no one talked about dad. Like, no one grieved. It was just about, okay, let's just get to the next thing. Let's just make sure that you're still alive, you're being fed and stuff like that. And I think that, it would be nice if I had more diversity on my show. It would be nice if there was more people like me telling their struggle, their story. But I just think it doesn't come naturally to us. And so, I think I say all that just to kind of talk about that cultural difference of like who tends to be more expressive than others. And so even for myself, I feel fortunate to have arrived to a place where I know my story matters. It took me a while to get here, but I know my story matters. I know that me just talking is rare for someone that looks like me. And so it's become a responsibility. But I do know, the average person I talk to, like the average podcaster, it's still dominantly, our Caucasian white counterparts, right? And so, I don't know if that fully answers the question, but I think culturally it's like, it is interesting how, we're still not as expressive as colored people, when I think that our stories are truly matter and they're so important and so needed to hear. And so I sort of wish, part of my hope for the show is that, let's say more colored people listen to our conversation, are enlisted or served or have served or are a spouse, reach out to me and be like, hey, like, I have a story to tell, and have them on the show. So, does that answer your question? Like, I feel like I kind of danced around that sort of, but I hope that kind of sheds some light, there.
No, sure. I think the key takeaway there in particular is you hit the nail on the head when it comes to a cultural norm of being expressive and sharing your story. A lot of people of color, our cultures, we want to keep things close-knit or in-house, so to speak.
Yeah,
and that can be really difficult when you're in the military, because you're traveling to so many different areas and you're around people who are of a different culture and you're around people who don't look and sound like you. And then you kind of have a struggle with your own personal identity. And you're like, I don't know who I am. You mentioned being born in Japan. And I'm sure when you were in Japan, or, your parents probably didn't know how to fit in there. And here they are in the military life. They're from a different area and they could have an issue. And naturally, we feel much more comfortable talking to somebody about our issues when they look and sound like us. And when you're
Yeah.
in an area where someone doesn't look or sound like you, there's this lingering, nagging thought or apprehension in your head that goes, this person is not your friend. They're an enemy and they're out to get you. You can't tell them about how dirty your backyard is because they're going to report you to the county, you know. So you got to keep everything close knit. So no, I think you did a good job of just explaining to a lot of people who maybe don't look and sound like us that it can be a challenge when you go to certain parts of the world and there is nobody there that you feel like you can turn to. So one thing that I think your company does really well with the U.S. Vet Wealth is you give people a virtual space to turn to. Not only do you do that with the podcast, but you do that with your website. Can you talk a little bit about your website and what people should expect to find on it?
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to, if you don't mind me backtracking a little bit, I just wanted to touch upon one more thing about just kind of being a minority in the military, or just my experience growing up. Like, yeah, it's interesting because it's like, you know, with how my mom was culturally, she either kept to herself or just she stayed in touch with her family back in the Philippines. She was always buying those, you know, minutes, like those cards that had minutes that you call, right? Yeah. And then also, you know, it just seemed like she either kept to herself, or as soon as she knew that someone else was Filipino, she would just talk in Filipino. Like, she would just start talking to them, assuming, and really like build that connection. But other than that, yeah, she was very, you know, she kind of modeled that, oh, if you're not like me, I don't talk to you. And I don't think she meant to do that as a way to other people, you know, but I think it was just out of comfort, right? It's out of comfort, familiarity, like, oh, you're Filipino, therefore we're best friends now, you know? And
right.
That actually trickled to me. Like, I think about all, like, the duty stations we've been to or the places we've been at, and I just somehow gravitated to other Filipinos. And I think that's what we all do, right? It's like, if you gravitate towards something that's familiar. And if you, even for me, being in Virginia Beach now and being around, pretty much in a predominantly white area, it's like, I can get by pretty easily. Like, I can talk to anyone. I'm a podcaster, right? Like, I can strike conversation with anyone. However, you know, it just feels so much easier to talk to someone who's Filipino, because they like, you just have that mutual understanding of like, yeah, like I get you. I know your I can sense your struggle. And I can, and also culturally, we're very family oriented, right? Like many Americans, are not, right? Many of them are all about like individuality and, you know, creating a name for themselves and leaving a legacy and, you know, keeping their last name and what have you, or handing down their last name to their next kin and stuff like that. And just, I'm just generally speaking, of course, I'm not trying to stereotype everyone, but that's just my observation, having a white husband and,
sure.
and how his life, he tends to be more in solitude, where for me, I'm so hungry for community and a sense of family. But that's definitely one thing I thought about and think when we were talking about this whole thing. And that's the one thing I wanted to add, is just kind of what my mom modeled for me, of just kind of gravitating toward people that look like her, sound like her, you know, share the same descent, ethnic descent and stuff like that. That I guess in a way I still do that today. So there's that. And, okay, cool. So going back to your question, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add there, but I wanted to make sure I throw that in
no
there.
problem. No, you're great.
Yeah. And so, with our company, US Vet Wealth, again, it's not for everyone. Let me start with that. We are not your typical financial firm where we're going to talk to you about retirement and how to save for retirement and, you know, wait till you're in your 60s to pull money out of your account. Because anytime before then, you're going to get a penalty. You're going to have to pay a penalty. We don't take that approach, because when it comes to military families, when they retire, they're still pretty young. Like, they're in their either late 30s, young 40s. They still have another, you know, 10, 20 years of working age before they retire. And so we do something very unique. Like, we believe that, you know, our military families, our career military families, truly deserve a sense of freedom and autonomy in their post-military life. They deserve it. You know, they sacrifice a lot. However, you know, a lot of financial education is tailored towards civilians, and kind of like the civilian who has, you know, climbed corporate America and, saves for retirement or what have you. Or of course, like the wealthier families who, have different, like they just deal with their money differently. And so we specialize in career military families because they're not jumping from one corporate job to another. They're transitioning from one completely like unique, crazy lifestyle back to civilian life. It's not just a financial transition. It's an emotional transition. It's a psychological transition. It's there's so much to that transition to post-military life that the regular, civilian financial advisor just cannot help with, or they just don't understand that. Very often, a lot of, let's say, realtors will say, oh, we'll help you with your VA loan. Let's help you get your first house and stuff like that. And like, that's great and all, but like, it's more than that. It's more than just being a homeowner. It's like, where do I want to be a homeowner so that I can live my new purpose in post-military life, so I can actually, re-explore who I want to be, maybe pursue the career that I really wanted to pursue before I joined the military, that passion that I had, a long time ago. And so when you go on our website, because we do talk about, a lot of like what I call thought-provoking financial education, we provide a ton of free education on everything our career military families need to know about, let's say, their survivor benefit plan, their thrift savings plan, just their military benefits in general. We show them that because the phrase we use is you served for it, you earned it. Like, you earned the right to achieve some level of financial flexibility in your post-military life, to not just jump into another job and not just, try to replace that military paycheck, but to maybe travel for a while, maybe start a business, maybe take it easy, maybe like intern somewhere, like explore apprenticeship. We just want to encourage our military families, the service members and of course the spouses, as a whole, to kind of rediscover who they want to be now that they have, now that they're not being told to follow orders. And so our website provides a ton of articles, blogs. We have a number of books. One of our favorite books that we're pushing for right now is called Veteran Wealth Secrets, which anyone can actually visit veteranwealthsecrets.com today to download the first 3 chapters, not 1, not 2, but 3, because we think that, what we're putting out there is very unique and most of all, most needed and deserving for, our military families. But yeah, it's very tailored to them. We also have more stuff on there, such as like access to our YouTube channel, information about my podcast show, Holding Down the Fort. My husband is also starting a show called Veteran Wealth Secrets, the same name as his book, to interview veteran business owners and also kind of serve as a talk show for us to talk more about our philosophies. But the greatest takeaway that, to sum up the website, what you'll find is just a ton of education and resources for these military families who are transitioning out or even about to, or still pretty seasoned, like still serving active duty. Like, let's say they're 10 plus years in, and they're looking for a way to maybe reinvest their money while they're in service, because there's definitely a lot of active duty service members who, get into real estate or other types of, side hustles while they're in service. Which is pretty astounding when they do that, because it's like they already are bombarded with so much work, I think.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, just a ton of overall, just a ton of value. That's really what we're trying to push for, because we know that what we teach is not talked about enough, and therefore, it is very easy for a service member and a military family to kind of look at it with skepticism. And quite honestly, we welcome it. Like, we want you to be skeptical. We know you're going to be skeptical. So really, really look at our education, our articles and all that stuff, and really see that what you have is good, but what you could have in learning through us could be greater. That's really what we're saying. You could do just fine with what you already have. But if you're looking for more options that actually might be greater for you, our website is that place for you.
Well, Jen, I think it's been a wonderful conversation. I think it's been huge, too, for people to have an extra outlet to go and learn. I think one of the best things anybody can do is learn, especially when it's given away in some cases for free or at very little expense. I think we do so many things to learn about the things we're passionate about. Why not be passionate about our financial security? So I think that's really, really great, something that you're offering. Well, Jen, thank you so much. This has been a huge, huge opportunity, not only for me, but I'm sure for many of our listeners. And I'm sure I can't wait to hear more of your episodes. And hopefully I can have you back on the show in the future.
Yeah. Hey, I'm all about helping and giving and educating. And so if I can give back and be back on to help your listeners, like I'm for it.
Hey, y'all, welcome back. And I hope you enjoyed that interview. It was really fun for me. It's kind of like when you go and talk to somebody who lived in the same neighborhood as you, or you go and talk to somebody who served in the military just like you did, and maybe served at the same areas that you did, or maybe you worked at a particular company for a long time and you run into somebody else who did too. It's kind of like this camaraderie that you have, even if you never met the person before in your life. And I felt this chemistry with Jen. I thought it was really, really cool, super fun. And I can't wait to have her on the show again. And I think I am going to make an active effort of having more podcasters on the show, only because it's just fun. It's just fun. It's kind of like why comedians hang out with comedians. It's like I want to get in on this podcaster crowd. I think it's well overdue. Well overdue. So I'm gonna tell y'all something really funny, and I'm gonna tell you how one of my friends ain't spit. So my buddy Chuck, obviously I've been ranting and raving about this bike, and I'm excited to learn, how to ride it and everything. And obviously Chuck, huge supporter of the show, huge supporter of me as a person. My man goes out and gets me a bike bell for my bike, and he's like, "It's blue, your favorite color." Oh, thanks a lot, you jerk. Gets me a bike bell. I said, I'm gonna use it too. I thought it was hilarious. It's a great gift. One of those gotcha gifts, and I'm going to use it, Chuck. I'm not scared. I'm not scared. I'm going to use it. But it's on now. It's on. And in the note, he knows I'm learning Spanish, so this is what he did. He took the fact that I'm learning how to ride a bike, and I called him up, and he goes, "I'm not worried about your safety. I'm worried about other people's safety." So he gets me the bell. He makes sure that it's blue. He thinks about the whole bike purchase, but he also puts the note, like it was a gift. He also put the note in Spanish because he knows I'm learning Spanish. And there was some words that I didn't really know, but I was able to translate enough of it to understand it. But you're the man, Chuck. I love you, man, and I appreciate you. And if anybody else out there, if you're a bike rider, if you got any advice, please reach out to me. Let me know. You can hit me up on any of my social medias, or if you got my number, text me. I would love to get some advice. Some of those things that maybe a lot of first timers overlook. So with that, I'm gonna bid you all adieu. I hope you enjoyed your Black History Month. I know I did, and I can't wait to talk to you guys in March. Until then, as always, I'll keep talking if you'll listen. Take care.